Yeah. So let's dive into it. Beth Charbonneau, thanks for coming on the Robin Smith Show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So first, I want to ask you, like, you're a local gal, right? Where are you right now in the country?
College Park, Maryland.
Okay. How long you been there for?
Been here for about 20 years.
Oh,
So,
wow.
yeah, it's almost like I'm local and native
So
at this
we're
point. But
right. So my wife and I, before we were married, we lived in College Park on 47th Avenue, right across from the Home Depot on Cherry Hill.
oh yeah, I'm
Uh,
just across Route 1 from there,
okay.
over
Okay.
by
Yeah.
where the REI used to be and the Mom's
Yes.
Shopping Plaza, all that good stuff.
Yes, that's right. That's where we got our tent and we enjoyed Mom's Organic Market while we were over there. So
Exactly.
you've been there for about 20 years, you said?
That's right.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in New England, in New Hampshire.
That's
So I
right. You
grew up
said
in New
that.
Hampshire and went to college in Massachusetts and was a New Englander all the way up until adulthood.
Mm-hmm. So what brought you to College Park?
So, kind of a bit of a winding road. When I finished college, I actually was in college for theater, and I went out and started doing some freelance theater work and quickly determined that life in professional theater was not the same as life in college theater, and maybe that wasn't going to be my path forward, and had to figure out what to do from there, and was really in some ways starting from scratch. I'd really assumed that that was going to be my career path, and so needed to figure out what I was going to do, where I wanted to live, and basically started going down the East Coast major cities and figuring out, well, Boston felt too close to home, and then New York felt too big, and I didn't know anything about Philadelphia or Baltimore. So I'm like, well, I know a couple people in DC. Maybe I'll kind of start in DC. Took a train in and just started temp working and really just tried to kind of start from scratch about figuring out what I wanted to do and where I wanted to be, and ended up staying in the DC area after that. So,
Mm.
and then eventually made my way into deciding to go into social work graduate school and then into clinical work for therapy.
Okay, so a winding road that takes a lot of sense of adventure to just take the train down,
Yeah.
and like you said, you had a couple friends, or were you staying with friends while you were kind of landing, or?
I was able to stay with a friend of a friend who put me up for about a week while I found housing, and then got temp work through a temp agency, and basically arrived with a garment bag and a giant backpack and a plug-in phone. I was like, well, I guess I'm here now.
Yeah. Well, I have to ask you, what was there's a couple questions brewing here, but what was the one of either the first or one of the temp jobs that you got? Share a fun story about that.
So a great place that I temped was over at National Geographic, and it actually turned into later working there as a full-time employee for a while I was figuring out what to do, kind of doing some admin support work around kind of helping folks who were in the television side. And so it was actually a really great place to kind of land. There were a lot of young people working there. There were a lot of interesting things happening. And it gave me a chance to kind of just get my feet on the ground and figure out, like, okay, how do I be an adult and
Hmm.
figure out how to work a job and live on my own, and then figure out, okay, exactly what is it that I want to do kind of career wise. But it was a great place to work. And so
Yeah.
yeah, temping there was a terrific opening into that.
My one of my roommates, when I was in my 20s, he's an audio engineer and he worked at Nat Geo. He was doing kind of sound design for some of the shows. What was your role as a temp? What were some of the stuff you were
So I
doing?
was doing admin support for people who were working in various parts of the television side in terms of producers and writers. And so I got to kind of see what they were all doing and provide admin support for them.
Okay, gotcha. So, and then I wanted to ask you, so theater, let's rewind the tape here. So when did your, when did the theater bug, I keep framing it that way. There's got to be a different way to frame it, but really, getting bit by the
Sure.
bug. Yeah. Was it middle school, elementary school, high school?
Definitely early. So probably back in middle school or maybe even earlier, my mom would take me to a show and I just kind of, my eyes lit up and I was like, oh, that's pretty amazing. And then kind of getting to do those middle school plays and the high school theater productions. And by the time I was in high school, I was like, okay, yes, this is definitely what I want to do. And so that was kind of what my assumption was, kind of going into college, that was my path. And I kind of stuck to it and got my degree in theater, and um, then had a little bit of evolution from there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, tell listeners about some of the stuff that you did in theater companies and your different experiences and roles, or if there's a particular play, or did you do musical theater also, or?
I did. It was not my strongest suit. I actually preferred plays over musicals.
Okay.
So my daughter is more of a musical theater person. So I've now got
Mhm.
second generation theater person household here, which is a little frightening. But she's much more musical theater than I ever was. Those were a means to an end for me. I wanted to be involved, but I preferred the plays and the acting. And so it's where I started. But actually, when I was in college, I ended up concentrating in my major in lighting design. So that was really where I kind of got a lot more kind of creative and things that I hadn't known before. And so part of also how I kind of made my way financially through kind of supporting a little bit through college was I would work in the light shop as an electrician, and worked for some of the local theater company groups, like when they did like the Nutcracker seasonally, and did some
Mhm.
either electrical work or props work. And so kind of started kind of being in the design and behind the stage part of it. And then went on after college, when I was leaving there, to go do some production management work, kind of how all the pieces all fit together for a show in a company. So got to kind of try my hand in a lot of different parts of it, and really enjoyed the process of seeing how it looks from all the different angles. Because when you're the lighting designer, you really want to make sure your actors know where they're supposed to stand so they can be lit. And as you're an actor, you're like, oh, I think I'm over here. And the lighting designer's like, you're supposed to be over there.
Right.
So it was kind of fun to get to see all the different angles.
Yeah. Yeah, no pun intended. So I'm curious how your prior experience in theater, is there anything from that gets integrated, even whether spontaneously or just happenstance? And I'm curious about that, about like because right now people are going to already know your work when I intro you, but yeah, tell listeners a little bit about how does that how does that side of you, or that older Beth, get revitalized and brought into your world now?
It's great. It took a little while to really understand that nothing's really wasted in terms of what we learned and experience. So I can really see how over time all of those earlier kinds of things that I did are have made their way into how I work now. In terms of things that look maybe kind of directly related, in terms of some creative interventions that may have more to do with kind of like looking like elements from psychodrama, or elements of gestalt work that can look a lot like theater stuff, but also kind of the improvisational aspect of it, and being able to kind of bring in kind of a creative process about how something unfolds within a course of treatment or within a session, really kind of goes way back to those theater days. And I'm grateful all of the time for the influence of those experiences on the work I have now. I've always been really kind of fascinated about like how the integration of all parts of ourselves kind of come together, and it includes kind of like the creative arts. So that also leads into the movement work I do, because I don't think there is this separation between kind of the mind and the body and all of those things. So kind of like having this background where the creative arts were just kind of like this foundational piece of it, it's really helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe for lay listeners who have, maybe this is their first time tuning into the show and they don't know what psychodrama or gestalt is. You want to lay some of that out?
Sure. So the psychodrama is really fascinating. It's its own kind of discipline, and people who kind of do this intensively, um, there are all kinds of kind of protocols and ways of kind of being in it that are unique to its own aspect. But we can see that people can bring their personal issues of therapy into what looks like an acting kind of environment. And so, we can draw on ways in which people can act out different roles to engage in sorting out a dilemma or an internal or external conflict. We can bring out different ways in which people are switching roles, so that you are not in your role that you're currently in, but you embody the role of maybe somebody else that you're in a conflict with or you're having an issue with. And so all of those elements can be played out either individually or in a group, which is a really powerful setting. And psychodrama is often done kind of in a group setting, and which is really interesting to see. And so even if you're not kind of doing psychodrama as a pure form, some of those elements can be brought into an individual session as well, which is where I kind of sometimes draw some of those things from.
Yeah, yeah. As you're talking, I'm looking at some of the stuff I wanted to ask you about. And Beth, I'm looking here. Do you do groups? Do you do group work?
I do not currently do groups. I've done groups
Okay,
in the past, but I don't currently do groups.
not currently.
Right now,
Okay,
I
because
work with individuals.
right, because you mentioned the difference between how that psychodrama unfolds internally versus externally. So, like, and I guess, does Gestalt get credit for the empty chair technique?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. Which is where a lot of that kind of theatrical background can come in. Yes.
Right, right. So if you're working with an individual, as you were saying and laying out, you might have one of your clients who's saying this is the dilemma or this is the challenge in their life, and so how do they butt heads with this other person? And then they're saying, with Gestalt, it's actually literally take that person and put them over in that chair, or sometimes the therapist's like, now go sit in that chair and
Exactly.
and embody, your dad, your mom, your roommate, whatever. Right?
Exactly. Exactly. And
Yeah.
that's where all of that kind of acting background comes in, about feeling like, okay, like I can encourage somebody to get into that process of really, yes, become that person for a moment to experience
Yeah.
that situation on the other side of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So let me bookmark doing it externally, because here I have I'm really curious to know some of the ways that you help your individual clients. I imagine some listeners might be thinking, especially listeners who have never been in therapy before, and are like, I couldn't do that. Like, sure, I could advocate for my own voice, but you're going to ask me to go like sit in another chair, or sometimes just like, just imagine the energy of what this other person is and try to really, like, I'm not an actor. What are you asking me to do here? Like with that kind of resistance, or I mean, I kind of balk at the word resistance, right? But that kind of discomfort, organic discomfort, or lack of
Yeah.
trust in self to do that. I'm
Yeah.
wondering, surely you encounter folks who have that flavor of energy. How do you help them with all that?
Well, the thing is, none of this is mandatory. If somebody really doesn't want to do it, we don't have to do it that way.
Right.
There are tons of other things we can do. My toolbox is pretty wide after this many years. But for
Yeah.
somebody who wants to do it but is unsure or feels some resistance around it or is feeling shy around it, it can help to just be playful. Like we don't have to start with the thing that's the hardest. If you're kind of saying, well, I'm going to try to like act like my dad or my mom. I've got this like big conflict with them. I think let's maybe just kind of take that down a notch and say like, okay, well, let's pick somebody else that's not as much of a hot button here, right? Can you do an imitation? Even we can use celebrities. We can use people who are at a little bit of a distance. Can you do an imitation of this person? Can you imagine what they'd be like? Can you walk down the street like J-Lo, right? Just finding a way to kind of like playfully enter this idea of like, oh, I get what this is like. We did this as children, most of us, in terms of dramatic play. We would play all of the time. Like, oh, we'd play on different roles, different kind of family roles. We did all of those things. And we've just kind of gotten out of the habit of it. And so if we can get
Yeah.
a little bit of that playfulness back, sometimes people remember, oh yeah, right, I can do that. And so kind
Mhm.
of like coming a little bit from an easier ramp can
Right.
sometimes help people warm up a little bit just to the idea first before we kind of like, we don't have to go straight into the hardest moments of it.
Right. Right. I hear what you're saying, Beth, as like, you don't have to start with the final boss. If you're going to talk about like, oh, you're
Right.
asking me to like do this, like sort this out with my mom, why don't we start with like, say your like oldest friend, probably someone whose
Exactly.
oldest friend, like they know them, they have their mannerisms down, etc. And
Exactly.
also what you're saying is invoking play. I mean, the spirit of playfulness is what allows someone to have that flexibility and dropping that sense of like, oh, this is performative, and just
Yes,
allowing themselves to not be so self-critical, self-conscious, etc. And
absolutely.
you're so right about, I mean, I don't know, this is a radical claim that all children, because you were careful in your language of saying most children most of the time like had the ability to do this. And I'm kind of
Yeah.
sitting over here being like, don't all children, don't all children, even in war, like even in the most abysmal circumstances, like kids, I don't know. Again, it's a radical claim, but to your point is yes, we all I think all, but maybe that's too extreme, have the ability to do that, but our adult selves, you said, we get out of the habit of doing that.
Yeah.
And I'm an IFS guy, so I think like, yeah, the access to the inner heart children is literally just meeting the part of the person that is having a heart, that is resistant or does feel self-conscious. Like you said at the top when you first answered, you said none of this is mandatory, and that's
Yeah.
really important to know that.
Yeah.
Yeah, like that intervention is not going to go well at all if the therapist is attached to this agenda. Like, I must do this kind of an intervention this session, right?
No, no, that's why I'm just, I'm always kind of like a collector of, different ideas and different approaches because things work differently for different people. And it's amazing, what's going to be just the right thing for one person is going to be absolutely not the right thing for another person. So
Right, that's
kind of
right.
just having some options available is great. But somebody who is interested and does want to try it, I do believe that if there's a hint of willingness, we can get them there.
Yeah, and not only there, by the way, you're right. If most of the senators are voting yes on this project, like you can get them there. But I actually kind of think that I mean, there's a lot of power to this technique or this way of being to embody the energy of someone else. Because even if we're thinking, oh yeah, this is just the spirit of playfulness, like we could open that door to, okay, I'm just gonna role play. We're role playing right now, like,
Hmm.
which means it's
Hmm.
not real, or
That's
like
right.
maybe a lot of people assume it's not real, and yet. And one of my mentors said this. They're like, just imagine you're putting on like a Halloween costume, right? Like at the same kind of pitch. And that's part of me was kind of curious about the different pitches that you give people, because in IFS land, this is allow the part to embody, allow, like, actually become the part. Like I'm
Right.
Robin right now, but I could be my brother, for example, and just be Ryan, right? It's like, okay, so I'm just playing around like I'm Ryan, like, oh, these are the things I'm interested in, this is what I like. And then, but there's this like seamless escape velocity from the
Hmm.
gravity of reality that then, by embodying that spirit
Hmm.
long enough, suddenly you have now unlocked something really special and maybe even ineffable. I don't know how to talk about it. Maybe you have the language for it, but do you know what I see you nodding your head about, like,
Yeah.
what's going on for someone when they're shifting from that place of, oh, I'm just being playful, I'm just
Right.
pretending to be my, mother-in-law or whatever,
Right.
and then something shifts. Can you speak to that a little bit?
You're right. It's hard to put into words, but it can be really powerful when we connect into a lot of the universal experiences that we have as people that show up in different forms in different people, right?
Mm,
So being able to kind of recognize, like, oh, that's what that burden of responsibility feels like for my brother, like to really feel that.
yeah.
Right. Because we know that feeling of, oh, the burden of responsibility of something in our own being, our own lives and everything. But like, oh, to feel that for somebody else or within somebody else's experience is a really powerful way of kind of gaining compassion and insight into our relationships with other people or parts of ourselves. Right. And
Hmm.
that's, including in terms of like kind of like with IFS work, like being able to kind of really feel what that experience is from that inside out perspective helps us kind of like unleash that kind of like capacity for compassion around it, because we know like these are hard things to hold at times, or these are wonderful things and we want to celebrate them in that way with other people. But it allows us to kind of make that bridge in some ways, I think,
Hmm.
that becomes, like you said, like really powerful. Like we're playing and then all of a sudden we're like, oh no, this is real, because I can feel what that feels like.
Yeah. I really like the way you put that the universality, right? It's the idea that well, I guess there's a couple of ideas. Like if you see someone like smack a mosquito, you're not empathizing with the mosquito
No.
necessarily. Now, but there are people. I would imagine people in the Jain religion that don't want to step on an ant, right? They are like, oh gosh,
Right.
that's the light. It's the end of the life, and that can be troubling, disturbing, upsetting, all of that stuff. A lot of people can relate to like hitting a deer or running, God forbid, running over someone's cat or dog or a child, right? But
Yeah.
where am I going with this? The idea is like there's this universality of if I see someone suffering, like when we watch, I mean, the Oscars were on Sunday, right? Like if we watch a film and we see someone's pain or someone's joy, there's resonance. So there's this universal human experience, and it is that like you can be traumatized vicariously. You can also vicariously heal. So
Yeah.
you can watch someone else do their healing work, and
Yep.
because of that universality that you're talking about, it unlocks your own spontaneous healing on your side. And so it is that interconnected universality that helps me better understand in talking with you, Beth, how you can be playful and then suddenly perspective taking, that empathy, all of a sudden like unlock something very real in you that you might not have recognized or had access to from not allowing yourself to surrender yourself and become the other person,
Oh
you
yeah,
know?
we're really attached to our agendas and our perspectives and our, opinions and preferences. Like we're really attached to those most of the time. So
Hmm.
it can take some real kind of shuffling to let that go for a minute.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we're attached to our identity too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I just think that the skeptical listener, I'm almost like not to be too salesy here about it, but it's just like this is the two therapists here are talking about the power of this stuff. And if you're listening right now and you're thinking that's not for me, fair enough. It might not be, but yeah, it's really, really powerful. And I think the best way to know how it is to try it, and to try
Yeah.
it in different contexts. But I wanted to connect or bridge over to how this stuff works externally. So so you don't do groups now, but in the
Yeah.
past, help people know what does that look like in a group session, or did you do family work or?
Not with this kind of stuff. So, group stuff that I'm more familiar with is kind of using psychodrama in a group together, which is where people are going to help each other with enacting their own kind of
Mhm.
scenarios. In the primary person kind of working on an issue is our protagonist, basically, and so we,
Mhm.
we get them in, and then we enroll people in the group to kind of help out, and it becomes a group process and a group project there. So that's what I'm most familiar with. But things can be used in more of a group process setting as well that are outside of my scope of practice, in which a lot of kind of ways of kind of bringing in this kind of alternate perspective taking can be useful as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'd be a fool if I didn't ask you about hypnotherapy, because I feel like I've had I don't think you're the first hypnotherapist, but I can count them on one hand, and there are always opportunities to ask questions. And actually, also not only that, but like I started this podcast in 2020, and I become a different guy after each episode, each week,
Sure.
each month, each season, right? And like what I'm appreciating about the power of hypnosis now, I always used to think, like how are hypnotherapists portrayed in TV and film? It's the
Right.
classic, look at this watch, and power of suggestion, and or Manchurian Candidate, like
Yes. Yeah, we're
all
gonna
of
make you
that
do
stuff.
terrible things. Yes.
Yeah, all that. But it's like maybe help me and help listeners know, um, how do you use hypnotherapy, or maybe even describe what? How did human? Do you know? And I don't mean to put you on the spot here, so feel free to speak to your obviously your level of experience and competency. But like, I'm curious about the history of hypnotherapy. Again, that if you look at hypnosis as a technology, right,
Right.
as a discovery, like so. Erickson gets maybe a lot of the credit as one of the founders, but I'm curious in other cultures and in other places in human history, right? How maybe it went by a different name. It wasn't called hypnosis, right?
Right.
Trance, for
Right.
example.
Yes, so shamanic work, those kinds of things where we see, yeah, ways in which people kind of enter altered states of consciousness in order to access different ways of being, healing, feeling, all of those other things. You know, we can talk about the whirling dervishes who kind of go in through to trance through dance. We can talk about shamanic healing. We can talk about all kinds of ways in which people kind of have experienced this idea of kind of accessing a different kind of layer of consciousness or altered sense of consciousness. And people have been playing around with that in lots of different ways, through plant medicine, also through different cultures. And so this is just kind of one avenue of this, of like, oh, we're going to get there by talking, right? You know, as
Mhm.
opposed to by gazing into something or dancing or by plant medicine or by all kinds of other means. It's, you know, this is like, oh, we're gonna go there through this avenue of talking.
Right, right. Go there being this other, we could call it a state of consciousness. Um, I tend to think of it as another realm. You know, like even daydreaming without hypnosis, right?
Right.
We're not, I'm wearing a Whoop strap. If I daydream, my Whoop strap is not necessarily logging REM sleep. It's not categorizing it as REM sleep, but it's
Mm.
also just not the kind of brain state that I'm in when I'm interacting with you and having this conversation. It's not the
Right.
same. In fact, what was interesting was I went and saw a shamanic healer, and I'm laying down and I'm wearing my Whoop, and I was like, oh, I'm interested. And I didn't even think about it until afterwards. I'm like, I wonder what Whoop logged in terms of doing that, being in the session. And it was like a nap.
Yeah.
It was restorative sleep. It was slow wave and REM sleep. It was like a full sleep cycle. Even though I was awake, laying down, right?
Right. Right.
Hearing,
And that's
yeah,
that thing of between like the science is helping us kind of understand more of the experience, and the experience helps us understand the science, and it all kind of builds together. But yeah, we go in and out of trance-like states a lot of the times. You know, even just watching a movie, a really good movie that you're really involved in, you didn't realize that 3 hours had passed.
hmm,
Or if you've been, you know, if you're really working through something in your head and you're driving home in your car and you just kind of, you're on autopilot and you don't even kind of, you haven't registered what you've passed, but you've arrived in your driveway safely,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
You know, we're often kind of in and out of trance-like states. And so being able to kind of use this in a purposeful, deliberate way for a purpose of healing or for a purpose of growth is really kind of just kind of taking something that it happens and we can kind of encourage it and kind of like and channel it and then be able to use it in a way that is purposefully helpful.
Right. In contrast with the purpose of entertainment, like this
Right,
person's going to buck like a chicken, or they think they're having sex with Madonna and they actually come on stage. Like,
right, right,
right?
right.
Yeah.
There's a very big difference between hypnotists and hypnotherapists.
Yeah. Say a little bit about that, because I do want to square in on the healing, but
Right,
I'm also just speaking almost for the
right.
the listener, the viewer. What's the difference between the two?
So people can be doing hypnosis and it's not therapeutic. Like you're saying, it can be done for entertainment purposes. It can be done for amusement. It can be done just for the sake of like a party trick. Let's see what's going to happen. That's not the same as hypnotherapy. Hypnotherapy is actually using this specific tool for a particular therapeutic outcome and experience. And that we're only practicing in the scope of our knowledge and experience. So, you know, there are a lot of people who do clinical hypnosis work from different fields, and they could be dentists or physicians or nurses or therapists. And we still don't, you know, even if we all have hypnosis training and hypnotherapy training, we still stay within our scope of practice. I've seen a demonstration of a dentist who was able to stop a client from bleeding through hypnotic suggestion. That's not within my scope of practice because I'm not a dentist, I'm not a physician. And just as the dentist also is not going to work on somebody, even if they have those powerful hypnotherapy skills, they're not going to be working on it in the mental health scope of practice. They're not going to be working on maybe what I'm going to be doing about a specific phobia. We still stay within our scope of practice because the aim of hypnotherapy is we should be working on things that we could solve without hypnosis because that's our field of practice. But this is another tool that we can bring in that's really helpful sometimes.
Yeah.
So if it's something that I wouldn't be able to treat without hypnosis, that's not hypnotherapy if I'm working on it.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Also, I'm thinking about the mind body connection when you talk about simply through hypnosis, the person can stop bleeding,
Yeah.
right? The power, I
Yeah.
mean, the power of the mind never ceases to amaze me. Um, I'm wondering, and I'm also associating to, like, I mean, that's a fascinating application. But in our lane as psychotherapists, like, I'm
Mm.
thinking of smoking cessation or whatever. Like, um, what are some of the things that the challenges that folks come in to see you with that hypnotherapy is effective for?
It can be really helpful. Again, staying with things that I can treat without hypnosis. This is a great tool to add to it. Things like phobias and fears. I've had a couple of people recently who wanted to become more comfortable flying, who
Hmm.
were afraid of flying. And so hypnosis can be really helpful for phobias and fears. Also did a lot of that during the pandemic for folks who had a needle phobia and who really wanted to be able to kind of
Mm.
comfortably go get vaccinated, but had a lot of fear around it. So hypnotherapy is great for phobias and fears. It can be really helpful in terms of, even though I'm not a physician, what I can do is help folks around issues with IBS or tinnitus or chronic pain issues, because so much of what happens with all of these conditions is the panic and the distress that's around the discomfort or the pain actually makes all of the symptoms so much worse. And so being able to begin to unwind that can go a long way to having a massive relief from the distress around it, which then can lead to symptom reduction.
Mm.
So those are some really kind of cool things that can be done with hypnotherapy. And then also just kind of around some of the things that people bring in about challenges in their lives, whether it's around kind of letting go of painful or difficult experiences, dealing with trauma. Hypnotherapy can be helpful for all of those things as well.
Yeah. Yeah. You saw me smiling when I was listening to you. And, like, when you're talking about the getting separation and distance from all of the anticipation, the panic and stuff, right?
Ah,
So if hypnosis, if entering that altered state allows the heart and the body to relax and allow the person, I mean, I think somewhere, yeah, your bio, this, whenever someone's bio contains the phrase their own inner wisdom, I'm like, I'm on board. You see what I see. You know what I mean? Like, yeah,
yeah.
we very much have this ability to heal ourselves. And if hypnosis can, um, hypnotherapy can get someone to just relax enough so that their body and mind can actually untangle the knots that it's found itself in, the stuck places that they've been living in for that long. That all makes sense to me, but the nerd in me, like, wants to, like, mechanically, like, all right, so what's going on there? So this is my intellectual part that's like, okay, so hypnosis is getting someone into an altered state, and used for therapeutic purposes. It's now just having the person navigate their challenge from a place of separation or from distance. I'm wondering if you, I mean, you'll be able to speak more
Yeah.
intelligibly than I can, but how do you break this down mechanically, or just like sequentially, or what's actually going on there? How, I guess, expand upon, maybe we could just use an example, like you said, phobias. I mean, let's use that. I mean, there's people have
Sure.
all sorts of fears, right? um
Yeah.
what are the mechanics of how hypnotherapy actually gets that fear to leave the nervous system?
So the fear didn't come out of nowhere, right? Like this has been building a while, right? So we've now kind of by the time we get to like somebody wants to talk to me about it, they've kind of like had this kind of solidified for a little while, right? That like they've maybe had a bad experience with something. They've then kind of like had additional times where they've thought about it and become more panicked around it. And then that's become distressing. Maybe they've felt really uncomfortable in their body around that. Like, so it's built up. for a while at this point, right? And so
Mhm.
hypnotherapy can be really helpful in starting to just kind of like unpack some of those things, because at that point we're not even kind of dealing with kind of just the pure experience of the thing that somebody is afraid of. We're kind of looking at this whole package now that somebody
Mhm.
has brought in around kind of like past experiences that were difficult and worry that comes up and tension in the body that happens and all of those things, right? And so hypnotherapy can help sometimes kind of peel some of those layers away a little bit, by, first of all, one of the nice things about hypnotherapy is that it's often a very pleasant experience for people, because we encourage a relaxed state of awareness, a relaxed state of focus. And so we can look at something that is maybe usually quite activating and challenging. And if we can do it in a way where we're in more of a relaxed state, we're building different kinds of connections, as opposed to the connections that have been built years and years and years in the making about kind of, when I think about this, then I have this muscle tension. When I think about this, then I feel like I'm going to throw up. And then when I think of it, like when I go near this, then my heart races, right? So we've built those connections for years and years. We're building new connections over here about, okay, I can sit and kind of like have a visualization of this or an experience of this that has come from a relaxed state of awareness. And
Mm.
I'm now building this connection of like, oh, I can actually engage with this issue and be relaxed and actually feel calm and centered, have a heart rate that is regulated, all of those other things. So we're building a whole new set of connections that then can compete with these old ones.
Yeah, so all that makes sense to me. That makes
Mhm.
total sense to me. Let's like the example is, let's say I'm afraid of roller coasters. And so every time someone asks, "Hey, do you want to go to Six Flags, Paramount Kings Dominion?" It's like I don't even, the moment they even suggest it, oh my I I am not afraid. I'm just using this as an example, although I used
Sure.
to be. Um yeah, so the body gets this like panic response or this fear response. And so hypnosis helps the person engage with the aversive stimuli, if we want to put it that way, the scary thing, but from this relaxed place. And then in being able to engage with it, the story of this material, this challenge, from a where their body is not having this old
Mhm.
reaction, that forms new connections and confidences and trust in the person to be able to say, oh, actually, it's not as scary as my body thought it was.
And I'd go further too. I'd want to know a whole lot more before we even began about, why is it scary to you? What about it? Because two people may be scared of roller coasters and have extremely different experiences about what is scaring them about it. One might be really afraid that they're going to throw up, and that's going to be embarrassing socially,
Sure, sure.
or that they'll cry and that's socially embarrassing in some way, right? Another person might fear there's a safety risk to it, and I'm afraid
Mhm.
that something bad's going to happen to me safety wise. And so we want to know more information about like what it is that you're scared of, what it is that's uncomfortable about it, because that's also kind of the beauty of hypnotherapy, as opposed to, things like recorded hypnosis tracks can be really helpful, but they're not tailored, they're not bespoke,
Yeah.
they're not
Yeah,
exactly like what you're saying. It's making an assumption, right? In order to reach as many people as possible, it makes an assumption about kind of like, oh, I'm assuming that you're afraid that the roller coaster is going to crash and you're going to
that's
die.
right.
But that might not be it, because it might be that you're afraid you're going to throw up and you're going to be really embarrassed,
Mhm,
right? And so really kind of getting a lot more information about kind of like, what is it about the roller coaster itself that you're really afraid of, is
mhm,
part of also that kind of therapeutic skill of it too. And that's kind of where, this isn't just kind of the skill of knowing how to facilitate somebody being able to move towards trance, but also kind of like those therapeutic skills, like how we, as therapists work with kind of getting that information and, eliciting that kind of understanding and insight.
yeah, no, all making sense to me, and while part of me wants to keep channeling down into the trenches of hypnotherapy, I also realize that we've got a lot of other topics, so I don't wanna, miss out on the opportunity cost there. Is there Beth, maybe I might just ask you, is there anything that we haven't talked about regarding hypnotherapy that you think is important for listeners to know about it or about the way you work?
I think one of the things that can be a misconception that can get in the way for folks is that they hope that that hypnosis is gonna make change effortless.
Mm,
That they hope it's kind of like magic in some ways, right? Like, You mentioned smoking cessation, right? Sometimes, I can hear sometimes somebody wants um, hypnotherapy because they hope that it's going to make it easy or effortless to engage in change, and that's all that needs to be done, that happens to them, that I, as
Mm,
the hypnotherapist, kind of makes that happen for them, when
mhm,
really it's an interactive process, and it's still part of a whole big picture of a change process, in terms of smoking sensation, like, right, like you still want to engage in a lot of those other things that we would see in smoking cessation programs that don't involve hypnotherapy as well, in terms of, what's your motivation, and, finding other ways to cope with stress, and like all of those other things too. And so I think that, whether it's for weight loss or smoking cessation or any of a number of things, there can be a misconception that it's kind of like something I do to somebody that makes things effortless for them. And
right,
that's
right.
not kind of how that works.
Right, Beth, I'm just gonna pay you to come into your office and you're gonna do the therapy to me, and then I don't have to put any work into this at all, right? It's
It would be
that's
a
what.
great deal for you, no matter how much it cost at that point. Absolutely. Right? Like
Yeah.
that would be fantastic. And part of it's probably secretly wants something like that. Well, wouldn't that be great if that were possible? But that's actually
Mhm.
not how it works.
Yeah, yeah. No, I appreciate you speaking to that. Okay, so Phoenix Rising yoga therapy. Tell me about, so when did you encounter your first experience of doing yoga, or someone said something to yoga about you? Tell listeners and myself about, how did yoga enter your life, and what does it look like now in the way you work?
I feel like everything happened in college. Like all of
Yeah.
all these things that I kind of first had experiences with, it probably all happened in college.
Hmm.
So it includes yoga. So when I was a senior in college, um, I had all those the stresses that seniors have, in terms of like, what am I going to do next? How am I going to get a job? How am I going to be able to like make this transition into adulthood? And it results into stress and strain and tension and all of these things. And, somebody had said, oh, yoga can be really helpful. And I was like, well, I don't know about this. And there was a yoga center in town because there was like, there's a college yoga class that was like a semester thing, but I didn't have room for that or whatever. Um, I wasn't interested, but there was a yoga center in town. I was like, oh, I'll go check it out. And kind of went in and kind of went to my first couple of yoga classes. And it was the first time that I had an embodied experience of being relaxed and aware in my body when we got to that kind of final part of the kind of corpse pose shavasana final relaxation bit.
Hmm.
And that was somehow magical to me. I was like, okay, there's something here about
Right.
this. And so I was like, I want to know more about this. And so I was like, okay, I'll go back. And then there was this great deal where this was before there was a yoga studio in every town.
Hmm.
So it was pretty affordable. You could get a monthly membership pass, and you could go to as many classes as you wanted with a monthly pass. And I was a student, so my schedule was pretty open. And so I was a yoga class 7 days a week for a while. And it became this kind of like whole new way of being in my body and being able to experience so many different kinds of ways of holding tension and effort, and then finding release and relaxation.
Mm.
And it was just kind of like all of these little pebbles kind of lining up for a path, because that then led me to kind of like, oh, you like hearing more about kind of yogic philosophy and kind of like the actual kind of history and kind of the limbs of yoga and all of those other things, which then led me to Buddhism and kind of more in-depth reading around that. And so it was this really fascinating little kind of like opening that led to this big path. Um, and that's where it kind of started. It started in like, I was a stressed out college senior and just went to a local yoga studio
Yeah, and was dedicated 7 days a week. You
7 days
know.
a week. I
Yeah.
was a student. I had the time.
Yeah, right, right. But there's something to be said about having a practice that's like, I go on Tuesdays versus every day, your
Every
nervous
day.
system getting to bathe in that.
Yeah, and getting so much variety too, because there would be different teachers and different approaches, and I was brand new, so it was just kind of like this really wonderful kind of like beginner's mind of like, oh, I'm just going to kind of
Right.
try it all out, soak it all in, find what I connect to,
Hmm.
and it was
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. So tell us about Phoenix Rising yoga therapy. What is that?
So, Phoenix Rising Yoga Therapy is a mind body therapeutic approach that combines the physical stretches that you might see in yoga, along with guided meditation and guided um, inner dialogue to allow for kind of a therapeutic experience. And so I was trained in this like long ago before the pandemic. And so it was always in person back then. There was
Right.
no such thing as kind of doing things remotely. It's really interesting to see how the pandemic has changed and opened up this idea of being able to do some of this remotely as well. But back when I was trained back in the early 2000s in this, it was all in person. And so the way sessions worked was that the therapist would actually physically support the client in being able to hold certain stretches and poses while engaging in client-centered dialogue about like what was coming up in themselves, in their mind and their body, and being able to reflect that back to them. And so it was a really introspective process that allowed people to have this mind body integration experience about like, here's how things in my life are manifesting in this moment, in my body, in my mind, and how can I work with them? Being able
Mm.
to kind of work at what, in Phoenix Rising yoga therapy, we call the edge, that point of like, this is really intense experience, but it's not past the point of me being able to work on it, but it's
Mhm.
really right there. It gets my attention. It's quite intense.
Inside of that window of tolerance, right? I wonder if you could
Yeah.
give a concrete example if the mind comes to it, just for listeners who can grok what you're saying, but you know, for even for myself, like you support the individual, their body, and they're having this internal experience, and you're reflecting it back to them. Give an example. Uh, yeah, what comes up?
Sure. I can give you an example. So, in part of the training is that as practitioners, we also underwent,
Yeah.
receiving our own sessions quite a bit. So, I'll just use my own example. I remember kind of one of those early experiences, and so it might be the practitioner physically supporting the body, or also using props. And so, being able to, one of the initial parts of kind of like a session is kind of like just kind of trying to quiet and center ourselves and kind of check in about like what's happening right now in our body and our mind, what we notice. And then being able to kind of pick a little starting point and go from there. So I remember an early session that where I was the client, where I was recognizing that there was a real tightness in my chest, and I was feeling kind of contracted and um, grumpy. I think it was, recognizing some grumpiness. And so the person who was the practitioner kind of led me into, um, in yoga, there's a pose called fish where you're on your back and you've got your elbows propped up under you so that your chest is kind of popped up and your head moves back.
Mhm.
And so she put some bolsters and blankets down so that I wasn't just kind of relying on propping myself up, or somebody wasn't holding me with their body weight, but I had that same experience of my chest being very opened by
Mm.
laying over the bolsters and everything. And the practitioner put a hand kind of on my chest, over kind of near where my heart is, and asked, very gently, what's happening, and really kind of, asked about like what was it being experienced in that moment, and didn't didn't make interpretations, didn't try to guess what was going on, but really just kind of fed back what I was telling her about what I was experiencing, physically, what was coming up in my mind, and she stayed present with that, and I just continued to kind of be in this kind of supported posture. And I remember, yeah, just tears flooding out at some point,
Mhm.
just, at some point recognizing, oh, that's what I'm afraid of.
Mm.
Oh, that's what I'm upset about. Right. But that it took that experience of kind of like really kind of working through from the physical experience and what was happening in my mind, and being kind of like supported in kind of the presence of somebody who could kind of hold and process that with me, to be kind of get there and kind of go, oh, that's right. And to have that release,
Mm.
right. Which was really powerful.
Yeah, the power of witnessing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Does that make sense? Does that
It
explain
does,
it
of
a
course,
little bit?
it does. Of course, yeah, my, I want to respect your boundaries, and so I imagine I'm not alone with listeners who are curious and like, oh, what did she let go of, right? Like, but the point being is that does help provide a little bit more concrete that, you know, the you're with the chest being open. It's a very it's not the typical we're walking around, we're getting our
Mhm.
mail, we're washing dishes. This is not how our body is
Yeah.
oriented, and so to be in this chest is expanded open, our vital organs are maybe more vulnerable to just overthink it or think about it evolutionarily, but like
Yeah.
the fact that the practitioner is there and just like you said, no interpretation, just
Right.
honoring, okay, this compassionate inquiry, right?
Yep.
What's coming up for you, and is it okay to feel that? And I'm right here, and there's just no judgment, and you're basically allowing the body is teaching you where it was holding on to stuff, and
Absolutely.
you had the safe witnessing of another person to say, okay, and just help guide you your own inner wisdom, know
Yeah.
how to release that fear. And then after the session, this is how does does that kind of yoga intervention, is there follow-up? Is there like, are there homework instructions or invitations? Yeah, help me
So
out.
the way a session works is the arc of it includes towards the end a looking towards integration in terms of like, okay, so what came up for you here during this time, during this session that was really important to you? And how do you see that moving into your week? How do you see that moving into your next couple of days? What are you going to do to integrate it? So it really is not just leaving it in that kind of session on the mat, but really kind of then how does it kind of come forth into your life? And so, yeah, it can be something that, you know, like a lot of things, you can kind of go back to and again follow up and continue to work on those things if you want, again with a practitioner, or it can be something that is a standalone intervention as well. Like, having had that kind of experience, I can then take what I got from it and then take it into my life and then go wherever I wanted with it. So it has that kind of ability to be either kind of part of a chain or also a standalone intervention. But part of the intervention itself, the session is having an integration piece in it, so that it doesn't just stay on the mat during that time.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I'm thinking of, yeah, EMDR, right? That as a modality, or IFS, retrieving and unburdening. I mean, there's always an integration.
Right.
Probably, I don't know that much about advanced integrative therapy, but there's always an integration part to it, so that it lasts. I know from the IFS world, and this is, I'll speak just for myself, not for the entire IFS community, but the way I view it is as a spiritual being, and having, when you get an energy out of your body, what IFS would call a burden, there's a hole, it's like an if you think about an egg that hasn't been
Mhm.
cracked yet, if there's a crack in the egg, a little bit of egg white or yolk can come out, but something can also get in. And integration is closing the door, sealing that door so that nothing else can get in. And that
Yeah.
this egg, as silly as the image is, can be a good egg, right? And not be vulnerable to um, what
Yes.
we might think of as regression, or just, if the vulnerability is not left as it is, it's actually helped, and it's contained. And I guess put more with IFS, when you're retrieving like a young part, you don't just retrieve the young part and then get all that stuff out of the part and then call it a day. It's like that it's relationship building with the part.
Right.
The part needs, there's follow up in IFS. Some practitioners will be like, you need to do it for 3 weeks or 4 weeks or 40 days, or like, people have different numbers, but there is follow up before it can just actually stick. This period, this, like, I don't know if you want to call it a critical period, but it's a period of plasticity in
Hmm.
the nervous system. So absolutely, it makes sense to me why you'd say yes. There's integration after that, after the intervention.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and much like, hypnotherapy or all kinds of other ways in which, we work with folks in a vulnerable state, we're responsible also for making sure that we have done that kind of that sealing up and kind of making sure somebody is re-alerted, reoriented, stable, ready to kind of like engage in the world in the here and now,
Hmm.
in a healthy way and balanced way.
So if I were to take a guess, I'd say that you had some dance experiences in college that that also connected JourneyDance. Tell me, Beth and listeners, about what is JourneyDance, and again, I'll ask you the history of it. What's your
Sure.
yeah? How are you touched by dance when you were in your youth?
So when I was young, my dance experience was dance classes. So, a 5, 6, 7, 8, and kind of learn your choreography and do the things and all of that.
Are we talking
And
ballet, jazz, tap? What are we talking?
tap, jazz, those things that'll kind of more kind of be involved in the musical theater world.
Uh-huh.
Um, and then kind of the experience of trying to find some freedom in movement when you kind of go to a dance, but that's really kind of a little bit stilted at the teenage years.
Oh yeah.
Um, so finding a little bit more freedom of that in kind of those college age years actually did come a little bit also from that stem from yoga as well. So when I started taking yoga in college, my favorite teachers at that studio were Kripalu trained. So Kripalu is the yoga center in the Berkshires in Massachusetts. And I really loved the approaches that they had to their yoga classes. And so I always kind of gravitated to Kripalu style yoga classes, even after I left college and went to other places, went to other yoga studios, other towns.
Can I pause you?
Sure.
Say that slow for me. Kripalu.
Kripalu. Yeah,
Say,
Kripalu. Kripalu.
okay. Okay. I've never heard of that style. Yeah.
It's in there's a Kripalu yoga center in the Berkshires in Massachusetts, and um, it's a very kind of, I think, meditative style of yoga. Back kind of when I started long ago, there were the way that they thought about kind of phases in kind of a yoga flow. The last one was meditation in motion. So, that you would do deliberate kind of work in postures and alignment and those kinds of things. But then there was also this idea of meditation in motion. And so it really had this kind of very meditative experience to it, which was different than some of the other types of yoga classes I went to that were much more kind of physically oriented.
Hmm.
So there was physical orientation, but also this meditative aspect. So these were the yoga teachers that I was always drawn to. And so at some point, I decided, okay, I really want to go. I want to go to the mothership. I want to go to the yoga center. I want to actually have like the experience of going and doing a retreat there. And so I go and I do my first thing and I go for like a welcome weekend. And the most amazing thing that happens there is this dance experience where at noontime every day there would be this, they called it yoga dance, and there would be each day there would be a different teacher and they all had their different styles. And it was this experience of starting to like learn how to move from the inside out. So it was like when we were like little tiny kids and we would just like move any way we wanted to when we danced, just because that's the way our bodies wanted to move and that's how we felt like it. And it
Hmm.
was this just a amazing experience of like rediscovering the kind of joyfulness in this that was, it was a total surprise to me. And and one night there was a dancing session with live drumming that was happening as well,
Hmm.
and it was like the best party I had ever been to. And I had this realization of like, oh, there's something to this. There's something really amazing about kind of this experience of kind of like incorporating rhythm and movement and being really present, and it was really cool. And so I kept kind of going back to this yoga center time and time again, and every day at the noon dance class, it'd be somebody else who had to kind of their own spin on things. So there's a big umbrella of these kind of like conscious dance forms. And people take them and go and develop their own styles around them and then teach them to other people. And so there's Let Your Yoga Dance that was there, and Shake Your Soul, and like all of these ones that were really interesting. But my favorite one was JourneyDance because it had this kind of other element to it that had this storytelling quality to it that was
Mm.
had this emotional processing element to it. It had these kind of rituals within it that was this whole package of this like transformative experience through movement. And I thought, this is cool stuff. And
Mm.
so, every time I went, I'd always want to go and enjoy these classes. And so eventually I decided, I should probably just go learn how to do some of this myself so that I can enjoy this wherever I want and kind of make my own little group of people here, because there wasn't necessarily a lot of people doing that same thing in the area.
Yeah, yeah. Well, look, you've successfully piqued my curiosity, and I want to ask you follow-up question, because what you're saying is, all right, so there's these different dance opportunities, but the
Yeah.
one that hooked me, Beth, was the one that had all these items on the menu, and like,
Yeah.
why wouldn't I choose that one? And so, can you expand on that a little bit? I mean, again,
Sure.
through whatever it feels appropriate and comfortable for you, using as an example.
So one of the things that I love about the journey dance process is the incorporation of these kind of elements of ritual that are within them. And I would have these experiences when I'd go as a participant of feeling like, oh, I was really able to kind of work through some serious stuff by these suggestions of movement that had a little bit of guidance of like, here's the big picture of what's going on, but you have full permission and freedom to do this any way you want within it. So one of the rituals that we often use in Journey Dance is this idea of breaking out of the box. So we
Mm.
all, in our lives, we all build boxes for ourselves about kind of the ways we think, the way we do things, limitations we put on ourselves. Most of us can relate to this idea of
Yes.
building boxes in our lives. And so through a guided practice with the music going. The music is always kind of this powerful element of it too, this well-chosen music. Through this kind of guided process, use the body to physically enact building a box around ourselves and then actually breaking it apart. And bringing to mind in our own experience kind of like, what is the box I have built for myself in my life? Right?
Mm.
Where am I creating those limitations? What is my box made of? Is it a really small box and they really need to bust out of it? Is it so huge that I don't even know I'm in a box, but I'm really definitely in a box? And the experience of what does it feel like in the body to move my body in such a way where I am enacting, breaking it apart, tearing it down. And it's a powerful, powerful experience of like getting to like be in that moment with it. And then having it incorporated into this, which is really cool, this group experience where there's all these other people doing it at the same time too. Like it's a really powerful thing.
Mm. Mm.
So
Yeah, that's I'm relating to it as you're talking, Beth. I'm thinking about that altered state or altered realm.
oh yeah,
Uh, and again, as an IFS guy, thinking about, well, okay, the whole totality of Beth is here in the Journey Dance class, and then there's an invitation to do something, and which parts of Beth are the ones that have agreed, okay, this is the box, and what age Beth is the one that's becoming more consciously aware of this box and now has the opportunity in this other space, not the dance studio, right,
yeah,
in the mind, in this other realm.
right,
I look at it as a realm to then actually interact with it, reorganize it. I don't want to say reconstruct, because you're really talking about destroying something, but maybe transforming it, right? Because these boundaries, the constriction, and transforming how that's all organized. And then having done that, to sometimes live drumming, which sounds really badass as opposed to someone presses play, but still the power of, I mean, the
yeah,
shamans know, right? The power of that drumming to enter into another trance, a state, or realm. And then is there an integration piece to that too, or how does that? Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's the Journey Dance has a whole flow to it, right? And we don't start there. You don't start with the
No.
ritual. You start actually with embodiment, like really kind of like slowing down, being in the body, often on the earth, like feeling our way into kind of like
Mm.
arriving back into our body in this moment here, and kind of moving into a lot of different parts. And after kind of a ritual part of it, there's also usually a celebration aspect of it, kind of like, okay,
Mm.
you open something up, and so it's like then there's a little bit of celebration and then integration towards the end, where it does end in, much like a yoga class will end in kind of relaxation, there is an ending bit that is more meditative and then restful, in order to integrate the whole entire experience into then stillness.
Mm.
And so there's integration kind of built within this process as well, kind of after rituals um, have been completed. And
Oh,
there's so many different kinds of the rituals that are really fascinating to kind of play around with and build from. And they happen differently each time. The box I build today might be entirely different than the one I built 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 20 minutes ago.
of course. Yeah. I am so grateful to have had this, not that we're ending yet, but just having this conversation with you, just in sequence, um, because it informs me, it really informs me about the kinds of questions I'll be asking upcoming guests who I know, who I know have a dance ritual where it's like, oh yeah, every morning for 2 hours, I go out and dance into the forest. And I'm like, huh, right? Like, all right. So now just wanting to research more about JourneyDance, and just, I know that dance and movement therapy is its own license, you know?
Yes. Yes.
And just thinking about also when you talk about this, Beth, it's in a group. Again, the power of human beings coming together to do something, to feel support in community, to not be alone. Um, you know, it's quite amazing the hardware and software we're walking around with here, and maybe how divorced we are, or separated, disconnected we are from ancestral practices. Like, I can't help but think about the kind of like Western prescription that is given to an ailment. Again, Western medicine has its place. I'm not knocking it. I'm simply contrasting someone who's saying, okay, I am suffering from A or B or C, and I'm not really getting any results. And then come to find out, oh, now I'm engaging in some other practice that humans have been doing some iteration of since the dawn of time from being our
Yeah.
species. And then, oh, I healed from that, not from the Western intervention. And in fact, I'm getting a lot better now. And in fact, I don't necessarily need to follow up with this Western prescription, or the Western prescription is now actually having more of a positive impact because I was log jammed at some place that the Western medicine was blind to be able to help me with. So I just really, really appreciate what you're sharing with me and listeners too.
My pleasure.
Yeah. As with this, Beth, anything else about JourneyDance that you feel is really important before we pivot? I don't want to pivot prematurely, of course. So anything else come up for you that you think is, yeah, would be important to share?
There's lots of flavors of this kind of transformational kind of style of dance, and journey dance is just one of them. And there are a number of practitioners, but it's not found everywhere. But if somebody wanted to give some sort of kind of transformational dance a try anything. There's a doorway open kind of no matter where you are. There's lots of different kinds and varieties in certain regions that are more popular than others. So if anybody has any inkling to try out what it might be like to kind of move in this kind of more kind of free way in their bodies, and to see what might be there, give any of them a try. It's pretty exciting stuff.
Yeah, well, I'm a soon to be consumer, because I think about myself. I'm like, it won't be surprising to me. I'll be turning 40 in May, and it won't be surprising to me that in opening the chapter of Robin in his 40s will be the beginning of, like, I think did one of us reference middle school dance
Yeah,
dances?
that was me.
So, right, like the sense of awkwardness. I know listeners will connect with this. The sense of awkwardness about like going into the middle school gym for a dance, and you're like there's a term that my physical therapist used this with me, and they were not trying to be mean, and I was not hurt by it. I was like, I feel seen. I felt validated. The term is motor moron. Okay. And that's like, I'm being asked to do something, and in my body, I'm like, I can't, don't, it doesn't. So for me,
Yeah.
that's to me, that's loads of trailheads on where to
Yeah.
go unlock and do this reorganization work. And I think dance is like a perfect vehicle to confront, not with hostility, confront might be the wrong word, but to meet, to
To
encounter this
invite.
stuff. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So you just you've really invigorated a large portion of my heart to, I mean, one of my first mentors was a dance and movement therapist, and I was like, yeah, okay, I understand intellectually, like dance and movement therapy is helpful, but I just I feel like every conversation I have with a new person around a new experience is more, it's another like person in this canoe with more oars that are just rowing towards this place of the potential for healing and reorganizing through dance. So I'm really appreciative of that. Um, okay,
Perfect.
before we close our conversation, there's more to talk about here. I looked on your website. Is it pronounced Qigong? Is that the right way you say it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So how does do you work professionally with clients using Qigong, or is that just a thing that you
No,
do for your own personal
that's
practice?
something that I personally do for me. But it's a way of helping me kind of also understand and be able to kind of talk with clients about the variety of resources that are out there that can also help them if they were interested in it as well. Qigong is another kind of like meditative martial art form, like Tai Chi, and it's got its movements and ways of kind of engaging the idea of moving energy in the body, and it can just be a really wonderful practice for engaging with presence of the body mind connection on a regular basis. So that's something for me. But
Mm-hmm.
I like to kind of also offer ideas if people are looking for possibilities for how they can bring that into their own lives. It's something that's
Right.
easy to do at home by yourself.
Yeah, I've watched like I've never practiced well, that's not true. Maybe once I like tried to do it along with my wife. My father-in-law does has done Tai Chi, but Qigong, what's the difference between Qigong and Tai Chi?
I couldn't probably give you a good explanation of that. There's probably somebody who could give you a much better one than that than me.
Sure. Sure. Well, what do you find helpful about Qigong? What is it? What about it does do you find value in?
I find it really helpful in being able to unwind the go for me. So sometimes it can be hard to kind of go from 60 to 0 to just sit in meditation. So I've kind of had a practice of meditation for 20 plus years, but it's not always stillness. And sometimes I can't kind of just sit down. And so being able to engage in meditative type movement actually is really helpful sometimes, because it gives just enough engagement for what's happening with my mind and my body that I'm able to actually be more present than if my body is still. So
Mm.
that's one of the things that I find super helpful about it.
Yeah, I can understand that. Yeah. I yeah, so I mean you meant you're connecting the phenomena of or the experience of mindfulness with movement, and I mean that's kind of the through line or the thread through much of what we've talked about today. And I'm wondering if there's something that you can share as like a pro tip for listeners who maybe haven't given any of the stuff that we've talked about a try, but kind of weaving over to mindfulness. Wondering what you can speak to for someone who maybe is finding they struggle in their mindfulness practice, or they don't find it, they're like, everyone keeps talking about why this is valuable, or like all these therapists are all recommending this, but I just don't. I try it, I downloaded this app and I just don't, it's not working for me or whatever. I'm wondering, what you could speak to for a listener who fits that kind of profile.
Again, it's not a mandatory thing. So if you really don't want it, you don't have to do it. But if you do have an inkling, being able to being able to think about, well, what is it that you do like? What is it that you do want? And start there. Because if there is something that brings you great pleasure, great joy, that's a great place to kind of start from in terms of paying attention, because mindfulness is paying attention. So maybe you're not going to feel real motivated to kind of sit here and count your breath. Fine. But if you really love the muffin that you eat every morning for breakfast, I bet you could pay really close attention to all of the details of that muffin, right? So start with something you already like, that you already want to pay attention to. And we build the muscle of this kind of like greater focus and attention and awareness from something that you want to pay attention to first. And
Mhm.
then we can build out from there. Right. So if you love that muffin that you eat, kind of like we can get into the nitty gritty details of all of the things you can notice about that muffin.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Of course it does. I'm attributing you said you've been doing this 20 plus years, and this is the example of the role play and the mindfulness. It's like we don't have to start at the boss battle, right? Or like
Right.
let's
Right.
let's let's hop. You're already on this metro train. Let's hop on where you already feel momentum. You don't have to carve out time to do anything. So it's almost like, yes, it's not mandatory. That's right. And maybe the person will have more buy-in if we already if they don't have to start from zero velocity. You're already
Absolutely.
you're already in motion, so to speak.
Absolutely. Like, let's take advantage. Like, if you're even thinking about it, there's some part of you that wants something about that. So let's capitalize on that, right? And yeah, there's not a lot of need to kind of just fight it out and kind of like the whole like, oh, we got to go hardcore and go for the hardest thing first. Like, it's not a lot of need for that.
Well, not only that, but I will say there are, and you said where in Massachusetts again? Were you from?
I actually grew up in New Hampshire, but I went to college in Massachusetts.
Oh,
So,
okay, okay,
but
okay.
I'm familiar with the whole Massachusetts area.
Right. Well, there's a culture here in the DC area also of like, let's do it, right? Like, do the
Yeah.
therapy on me. Like,
Right. Right.
right, or like I got to come to therapy to like put in the reps, you
Right.
know, do it. Let's go.
Yeah.
Let's go. Let's put the effort in. And
Yeah, I
yeah,
would do
that's
that's like kind of the K Street approach to therapy, and I don't do K Street approach. I
right.
do more Tacoma Park, like let's maybe
Yeah.
have some tea, probably something you're interested in. So
Yeah, well, yeah, and there's a lot of value in that energy and that commitment and that like get after it. It just happens to have a counterproductive effect on the sorts of healing like work that we do. It just
yeah,
doesn't, you can't, there's been several times where you're like, it's not mandatory. It's like, so if someone's trying to force themselves or push themselves towards something, it's like, I think of it actually, hold on. You see me reaching for my phone because I do Insight Timer every now and then. And I think I saw the quote on today's Insight Timer. I loved it. Rushing will not make you heal any faster. Slow down and pace yourself. Alex L. or Ellie. I don't know. But that's
yeah,
exactly right. Like, this is not something that works by striving more and efforting more necessarily. I mean, you have to show up. You do have to show up.
absolutely. But don't show up in opposition to yourself, right? Like I'm also kind of all about like really kind of trying to befriend like all parts of ourselves here, right? Like there's the part of you that is resistant around something, or the part of you that really kind of has some activation around something that doesn't have to be shut down. We don't have to kind of try to bulldoze past it. I don't like that idea. Like let's befriend like all the parts, and everybody's got kind of like a place at the table here.
That's right. I mean, now you're speaking, you're preaching to the choir, right? As an IFS
Right.
guy,
Yeah, as an IFS
right?
person, you know that.
Right. There's no, and bypassing causes it's a headache. It's not good. It's not
No,
good when we disrespect a member of our community, our inner, and in my view, spiritual community. It's like, I could go off on a whole rant about all that, but I won't. I won't do that here. That's for solo individual episodes where I don't have a guest. So let me ask you, Beth, I've been looking at your necklace throughout our conversation. Where did you get that from?
it was a gift from my parents. It's actually from South Carolina, and it references the rice growing from South Carolina that's been there, and the gates around some of the properties there. So it's actually local to South Carolina made.
Yeah, it's beautiful. So if you're
Thank
just
you.
listening to this, you'll have to go to the YouTube channel and see this. It's beautiful. Um,
Thank you.
okay, so let me ask you, let's pivot into a bonus round here. I'm going to give you a lightning round. I don't do this every time, but I feel called to do this now. I want to ask some just quick. This is where you can pass any of these questions. You can just say pass, but also, as you well know, don't overthink this. The first thing that comes to your mind, if you've ever watched Inside the Actor Studio, these are James Lipton's questions. I need to come up with my own thing, but I love these questions, so I want to get Beth Charbonneau's answers here. You ready for it?
I'm ready. As ready as
All
I'll
right.
be.
All right. What is your favorite word?
Plethora.
What is your least favorite word?
Stuck.
What turns you on?
Adventure.
What turns you off?
Pressure.
What sound or noise do you love?
Rain.
What sound or noise do you hate?
Lawnmowers.
What is your favorite curse word?
Fuck.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
Personal chef.
What profession would you not like to do?
Surgeon.
If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
You're right on time.
I love it. I love it. Now, I usually will ask these at the very end, but I wanted to go into them first. But I meant to ask you, um, what do you do for fun? What do you do to de-stress? Help listeners and viewers know just what do you do when you're not being a therapist, when you're not being a or yeah, any professional role that you embody. What do you do for fun?
I like to make things with my hands. So I'm not really good at any of them, but I just like to do them. So I like to knit things that are very simple, like scarves. I like to do pottery, but basically all I can make is cups and bowls. I like to bake and cook. So I like to just make things with my hands. I spend a lot of time in my head professionally. So doing things with my
Mhm,
hands are things that I like. I like to do easy things outside. So I like to be outside, but I don't necessarily want to sweat a whole lot. But I
mhm,
like to go on easy bike rides. I like to walk outside. I like to just kind of see what's blooming and happening out in nature. So
mhm. So you'll
I like
not
to
be
kayak.
oh, that's yeah, water sports are great. So
Yes.
you won't be caught in a hot yoga studio if you don't like to
No,
sweat.
no,
Yeah.
no, not going to be in a hot yoga studio, not going to be running a marathon, but always up for a paddle or, paddle board or a kayak trip or go for a nice kind of walk around the park.
Mhm. Well, let me ask you before we close, is there anything this is like a question I remember my dad gave me, and it tends to be useful in so many different experiences. Um, I'll ask it here. Is there any question that I should have asked you that I didn't? Because I mean, really, when we're talking about, am I allowed to know your age? How old are you, Beth?
I will be 50 this year
Oh my God, when's your birthday?
in October.
Okay, all right, October. So this is a big one. So I'll be 40 in May. You'll be 50 in October. This is a big year for
Decades.
both of us. That's right.
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
right. So yeah, I mean, in there's I ask your age because there's plenty of stories that you could tell, plenty, and yet just focusing in on the listenership and knowing what we've already talked about and covered, is there anything that I should have asked you about that I just foolishly didn't or was blind to, didn't know to ask you that you think would be useful for listeners here?
I don't think so. Those are kind of some of the weird and wacky things that I like to do and bring into my life and my professional life. So those are probably actually there's probably one story that might be a a point that was missing in the timeline of
Yeah.
kind of my first experience with hypnosis, but I didn't know it was hypnosis, or like kind of like how I learned how the mind kind of changes the body. So if that would be all
Please.
right. So
Yeah.
that actually was in college. I was a theater major, and one day I went into I was in directing class, and I wasn't feeling well. And the teacher could tell that I wasn't feeling well and asked me if I was all right. And I said, no, I've got these terrible cramps. I'm really struggling today. And she was incredibly generous. And she said, okay, we're going to make this a learning opportunity. And, we're theater people. So we're like used to being on the floor all the time and just kind of like doing whatever. And so she invited everybody like lay down on the floor, and she guided us through this guided visualization. And so I didn't learn later until this is actually a hypnotic technique that is used, this
Mm.
guided visualization of imagining, after kind of like doing a little bit of progressive muscle relaxation and deep breathing and all that other good stuff, getting nice and relaxed and everything, this guided visualization of kind of imagining kind of like the pain and the discomfort in my abdomen about being kind of like this tangle, this knot of like red light that was all kind of knotted up. And then
Did they suggest this?
yes. So
Okay.
she suggested that, and as the kind of the starting point of like, imagine that's the discomfort. And then the intervention was, she suggested, imagine a pinpoint of bright white light, like a
Hmm.
really small dot of bright white light, put it right into the most kind of tangled bit of the knot, just like when you're trying to like get a tangle out of the yarn or a necklace, and you put like a pin in it to try to like loosen up that area. Put that dot of white light in it. And with each inhale, let that kind of white light just grow. And with each exhale, all of that kind of red tangle begins to kind of loosen and unwind. And she walks us through this for like 5-10 minutes. And it's 15 minutes later, I get up and I feel fine. And it was this amazing thing. I was astounded by this. This is, I went to college in the mid 90s, and I still remember this vividly. It was this profound experience. It's like I had no idea that my mind could change my body. And it was this really powerful learning of like, oh, I have this tool within me that I didn't know I had. And so I used that tool again and again and again over time before I even ever knew that, like, oh, that's a hypnotic technique, right? That you visualize something and then you can visualize the solution to it. And it was an amazing experience. So that's a that was a fun story that kind of fits the timeline piece a little bit too.
Yeah, no, not only does it fit the timeline piece, but it also fits the power of the mind body connection. Um, and I mean, a lot of times people they talk about mind body soul or mind body spirit. I'm so glad I asked, and thank you for sharing that story because I mean, the hardcore rationalist and empiricist and skeptic, intellectual, analytical minded people are going to be like, I don't know if they know. I say we. I mean, I'm one of them, but also I actually have to suspend. I have to ask those rationalist parts that are just like don't have any theories about why that works. Ask them to just relax and allow that to happen. So if listeners are like, "Oh, it worked for her because she's like, look at her profession. Like she's in that space. I couldn't do that. It's like no human being is exempt or doesn't have the ability to do that. The when I hear you tell that story, Beth, now she suggested, okay, like, all right, you have this physiological, this somatic experience that is unpleasant, aversive. You want it to go the hell away as soon as possible. We're going to go ahead and go into the imagination,
Hmm.
which I contend is a realm, just like Jung and many other uh, theorists. Like this is a shamanic realm. People think the imagination. Oh, it's imaginary. My imaginary friend, or there's a monster in my closet. Like, it's. They think that's not real. It's not real because it's imaginary. I just think that that's
But we
not.
react to whatever we perceive. Like if I see something on the trail and I think it's a snake, I still react like it's a snake, even if it's a stick,
That's right. Yeah.
right?
That's right. The classic snake rope from Buddhism, right? Yeah,
Exactly.
yes, but so no, and so the thing is like, why would imagining this thing being this like red tight thing and then that light just like this celestial element, right? You're not asking to put the rope in a fire or rinse it with water or let the wind take it away or bury the rope in the earth. you're having this celestial element shine this little pink pinprick. And by the way, that's really intentional, to go slow, to titrate, to have this. There's Michi Rose, who's one of the founding voices in the IFS model, doesn't get enough credit. She offered this drop technique of the drop of compassion. Now this is dealing with, could be a part, could be something that's not a part. Would it, if it doesn't trust compassion, if it feels like compassion will hurt it, right? Like if you, like your love is too painful, right? Too painful to bear, or for someone to love themselves, right? Can that part, or can that being, take just a drop, or maybe even a half drop? So that's that pinprick of light, this little, like, just taste and see for yourself, just a little bit. And then from that, then we're in first gear. We have a little momentum. We can build and expand. And that the light in one's imagination could actually be the thing that could have a direct impact on the physiological sensation and clear this unpleasant experience out of you in 15, 20 minutes. It has the rationalists scratching their heads and being like, how does that work? How? Why does that work? Right? They're annoyed. The scientific Western post-enlightenment, it's like, what? Because it's like a, what kind of, you said it's a hypnotic intervention.
Yeah, it can be used in a hypnotic intervention, and that's one of the things that can be employed in a hypnosis session, is kind of helping somebody visualize a problem, image it, and then create a solution to the image within that visualization. And so it was something that I didn't even know was a kind of intervention like that. I was just following along my teacher.
All right. No, exactly.
I was
Exactly.
just, no, all I knew was I was hurting, and I would do anything to kind of like try to get some relief.
Right.
And it worked.
Right.
It worked.
Well, the scientist in me is thinking like, okay, when we go to sleep, we have the slow wave sleep and the REM sleep. Right. We know that slow wave sleep restores the body. Like if you've been trail running and you're impacting your joints and your skeleton and all that, sleep is what heals the body.
Right.
And REM sleep, people are, your dreams can be healing as well. You can work things through in dreamland, and so the rationalist in me is like, okay, well, nothing's going on from an external, exogenous. There's no like, what's the intervention? The intervention's coming from inside. It's coming from inside the body and the mind. So why should that be only in a place where you're asleep? If so that's how I can connect it. But I'm also speaking for, I'm embodying not just the podcaster part role right now, but I'm embodying the rationalist role that's like, or part of me that is like, I still don't understand why that works, but it does. And I'm so glad you shared that story, because I think it's perhaps an unleveraged or underleveraged, underutilized technique that people can actually get a lot of relief from, instead of being like, I have this, this syndrome, and the medical book is going to tell me that I need to do these other interventions that are not mind-based, not guided imagery. So I really appreciate you kind of spreading the word on many different pathways to healing and alleviating suffering.
And if you want to get into all the nerd science for yourself, kind of like, there's lots of information there about pain gates, and about how experiences of distress and tension are going to change and amplify the sensations and perceptions around pain. And so if you want to get into all the nerdy science around that, you can look up stuff about pain gates and how all of that kind of can be helped by relaxation.
Pain gates. All right. You heard it, listeners. Check it out. One more time. I guess we didn't, it'll have been introduced in the beginning, but Beth, tell folks where they can find you and learn more about you on the interwebs.
I am in private practice in College Park. I see folks in my office in downtown College Park, and also remotely for telehealth if folks are in Maryland. I'm licensed in Maryland. And I can be found on my website, www.bethcharbonneau.com. And There will be in my future some more kind of group events. I recently had a JourneyDance event that was my last one before a little bit of a hiatus before I kind of go into some more intense scheduling time with some family stuff. But in the future, there will be more group events that will be announced there as well.
Beautiful, beautiful. And may you have a joyous celebration of your 50th this October.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm planning on it. I've got good plans, and I hope you enjoy your 40th as well. It's a good time.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you. And thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you.